Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Holly Koswitz, and I'm the Director of Policy Development at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, which will disseminate findings from the second phase of a two-phase study examining dual credit programs in Texas. Leading the webinar is Trey Miller, Principal Investigator and Principal Researcher at AIR. And joining him are Courtney Tannenbaum, Drew Atchison, and David Knight. Unfortunately, Beth Ratway could not join. These are other researchers at AIR who led different components of the study. This webinar will begin with Trey's presentation and will be followed by a QA session, which I will moderate. And before we start, for those of you who are joining the webinar through the computer, you will notice on the right-hand side of your screen is a chat box. Feel free to post your questions about the content from this presentation. And because we only have an hour for the webinar, it might be likely that we won't be able to answer all of your questions. However, I talked to Trey before the webinar, and he told me that he and his team will answer questions we might have missed after the webinar concludes, and the coordinating board will post a document to its webpage that will summarize the questions and answers from this webinar. So I'd like now to turn the ropes over to Trey.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction, Holly, and thank you to everyone for joining today. So as Holly said, my name is Trey Miller, and I'm a principal researcher at the American Institutes for Research. As Holly also noted, the purpose of the presentation is to share findings from Phase 2 of our study of dual credit education programs in Texas. The overarching goal of the research is to inform Texas policymakers and stakeholders whether dual credit education programs in the state need to be reformed, and if so, how to reform them to better support students through teaching, advising, assessment, and allocation of resources, in turn helping Texas to reach the goals of 60 by 30 TX, the state's strategic plan for higher education. So today I'm presenting findings from the second phase, which began in August 2017. Phase 2 builds on and extends research conducted by the RAND Corporation in Phase 1, providing decision makers a more in-depth understanding of dual credit education programs in Texas. So we released a draft report of the findings that I'm presenting today at the July 26th board meeting of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and we'll have a public comment period through August 27th. As Holly noted, at the end of the presentation, I'll provide information on how you can provide comments and suggestions to us to help contextualize our findings and develop policy recommendations that are grounded in the findings and are mindful of the impact on all Texas stakeholders. For those of you who are just joining, just a reminder to please post your questions in the chat box, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation, and summarize them and answer them all after the presentation. So I'd like to formally thank the Texas Higher Education Foundation, the Houston Endowment, Greater Texas Foundation, Educate Texas, and Communities Foundation of Texas, and the Meadows Foundation for their generous financial support of the project. And I'll start by providing some background and context around why we're studying dual credit in Texas, and go on to provide some context about the contributions and limitations of our study. Then I'll present the research questions that we sought to answer in Phase 2. Next, I'll share high-level findings and a timeline for moving forward. So before diving into the details of the study, I wanted to take a minute to provide some context. So as we all know, changes in our economy require a more educated workforce. Researchers, policymakers, and practitioners nationally have responded to these changes with a large-scale effort to increase the share of the population with a post-secondary credential. Initially, most of the focus was on improving post-secondary access and encouraging more students to enroll in college. These goals and trends were embodied in Texas's previous strategic plan for higher education, Closing the Gaps by 2015, which focused on increasing college participation and reducing gaps in participation across race and ethnic groups. Texas made considerable progress in improving enrollments. However, completions continued to lag. These trends mirror patterns nationally, and research and policy communities now recognize the need to focus on student success and completion in addition to access and participation. Indeed, the state's new strategic plan for higher education, 60 by 30 TX, focuses on a multi-pronged approach to increase the fraction of the population holding a post-secondary credential to 60% by 2030. The figure on this slide documents the progress the state has made in improving post-secondary access in recent years. The figures draw on analyses produced and regularly updated by the coordinating board that track outcomes up to 11 years out for cohorts of 8th graders attending Texas public middle schools. We've plotted college enrollment and completion rates for the 1996 to 2005 cohorts of 8th graders who would have graduated high school in 2000 to 2009. These trends show that college enrollment rates held relatively steady during the 2000s, with just over half of public school 8th graders enrolling in some form of post-secondary education. Now let's look at completion rates over that same period. This figure documents completion rates for those same cohorts of public school 8th graders, and we see a consistent increase in the share of public school 8th graders completing a post-secondary credential during the time frame. The share of public school 8th graders completing some post-secondary credential increased from 17% to just over 20% during the 2000s. These trends demonstrate that Texas has made progress towards improving post-secondary attainment, but there's much work left to do if the state is to meet the goals of 60 by 30 TX. In particular, significant gaps still exist in college participation and completion rates across race and ethnicity in Texas. The figure here breaks the trend in participation rates out by race and ethnicity. We see that Texas made significant progress in improving college enrollment rates of minorities. Black college participation rates, in purple here, increased from 45% to 54% during the 2000s and are now roughly equal to the statewide participation rate. Hispanic participation rates, in green, increased from 39% to 43%. However, these rates remain significantly below those of white students whose participation rates have hovered just about 60% throughout the period. Looking at college completion rates, we see that despite significant improvement, minorities still lag significantly behind white students and exhibit very low college completion rates. Overall, just 13% of Hispanic students and 14% of Black students who attended a public middle school in Texas in 2005 and would have completed high school in 2009 completed any post-secondary credential. This compares to 29% of whites. Significant progress must be made if the state intends to meet the goals of 60 by 30 TX. So, as all of you know, dual credit education programs allow high school students to take college level courses that simultaneously provide credit toward a high school diploma and a college credential. Dual credit has been held up as a policy option that could improve college participation and completion. And proponents argue that if appropriately targeted, dual credit could also help reduce disparities in participation and completion across race and ethnic groups. Advocates of dual credit programs argue that dual credit education can help students get used to college expectations, provide academically challenging courses, and help to align curriculum across high schools and colleges. Others have argued that dual credit education can help lower costs to students and reduce overall time to degree for dual credit participants. However, dual credit is not without critics. Indeed, some have argued that some dual credit courses may not be as academically rigorous as college-level courses, and hence could set students up for failure later on when they take college courses after high school graduation. Some have also argued that dual credit education could be an inefficient use of public resources. Dual credit education often receives funding from a number of sources, including K-12 and post-secondary sectors. Also, dual credit students may not always receive college credit for the courses they take as dual credit, or may take unnecessary college courses due to poor advising. Finally, some critics have argued that dual credit education is less accessible to traditionally underserved students, including minorities and low-income students. So, due in part to promising research around the potential benefits of dual credit, the state has passed several pieces of legislation in order to expand access and participation in dual credit and other forms of college-level coursework during high school. First, in 2003, House Bill 415 allowed both colleges and K-12 school districts to receive funding for dual credit. Passed in 2006, House Bill 1 required school districts to offer students the opportunity to earn at least 12 semester credit hours of college-level coursework during high school, either through dual credit, AP, or IB. Finally, in 2015, House Bill 505 prohibited the state from restricting dual credit to only 11th and 12th graders and limiting the number of semester credit hours of dual credit a student may take during high school. Taken together, these factors conspired to create the perfect conditions for a rapid expansion of dual credit education programs in Texas. From 2000 to 2015, the number of dual credit courses delivered in the state increased over sixfold. Despite this rapid growth, little is known about changes in dual credit context, experiences, and outcomes over this period, and particularly since the passage of House Bill 505. We know that as dual credit programs have expanded, institutions have developed new ways to engage more students in dual credit programs that may have important implications. Amidst this backdrop, there are heightened concerns in the state around the rigor, efficiency, and cost of dual credit education programs. So the national research on dual credit education has been largely positive, but is lacking in many ways. In general, national studies have found that dual credit education programs are positively related to student outcomes, but findings from most of these studies of general dual credit education have been based on interviews or focus groups or descriptive data. Most of these studies have not included statistical methods to tease out complex relationships between dual credit course taking and student outcomes. While 2 experimental studies of early college high schools have found positive impacts on high school completion and college enrollment, it's unclear how these results translate to dual credit education generally, where advising and program access is less regulated. Moreover, nearly all existing studies of dual credit education and early college high schools focus overwhelmingly on short-term outcomes like high school completion and college enrollment. There's little evidence on college completion or efficiency metrics like time or semester credit hour to degree. There's also a lack of qualitative information on implementation and costs of dual credit education. As you'll see shortly, our study adds to this literature by providing causal evidence on short-term and long-term outcomes, including college completion. We also provide evidence on the impact of dual credit programs on efficiency metrics like time and semester credit hour to degree. We provide rich qualitative information on implementation related to dual credit instruction and advising, and we provide comprehensive information about the cost of dual credit programs and how those costs compare to revenues generated and the overall benefits of dual credit education to the state. This is the first study in Texas to comprehensively address the state's most pressing concerns around dual credit education programs at scale, and the first statewide study of similar scope that we are aware of nationally. The 6 primary research questions we addressed in Phase 2 were informed by the exploratory research we conducted in Phase 1 and extensive discussions with dual credit stakeholders across Texas. Through an extensive stakeholder engagement process, we will offer research-based guidance on potential reforms to dual credit education programs in Texas. The study also contributes to the national research base on dual credit education and helps to pinpoint where additional research is needed. The study really positions Texas to be a thought leader in this space. It's also important to highlight the limitations of our study. Given resource and time constraints, our study focuses primarily on general dual credit education programs delivered through community colleges. The extent to which we were able to focus on other forms of dual credit, including early college high schools, CTE dual credit, and dual credit education delivered by 4-year colleges, varied across different components of the study. As we move forward, I'll note where findings from each study component speak to each of these forms of dual credit. So before jumping into the research we conducted in Phase 2, I'd like to summarize what we found in Phase 1. The goal of Phase 1 was to give the Texas legislature an initial perspective on the accessibility, diversity, quality, and efficiency of dual credit education programs for the 85th regular session, which concluded in June 2015. Overall, we found that prior to the passage of House Bill 505, dual credit students outperform non-dual credit students on a range of post-secondary outcomes, such as college enrollment, persistence, and degree completion. But we also saw that students who enrolled in dual credit education before House Bill 505 were a select group of students and did not represent the general makeup of Texas high school students. In 2015, white students were still the predominant racial group taking dual credit courses. We also found that dual credit instruction and advising varied widely between community colleges. Some of them taught dual credit courses on a high school campus, while others taught dual credit courses on a college campus. Some employed high school teachers versus a college faculty, and still others had more robust support services, while others did not. So we saw a lot of variation in the way dual credit education is delivered in practice. Finally, we discovered that dual credit students took slightly less time and completed a similar number of credits to complete a 4-year degree as non-dual credit students. So phase 2 answered 6 primary research questions. First, like past descriptive studies, analyses we conducted in phase 1 showed that dual credit participants had much better outcomes than non-participants. The causal impact study used state-of-the-art econometric techniques to assess whether these differences can be attributed to dual credit participation or whether they were due to other factors like superior academic preparation or desire to excel in school. It's important to note that our econometric approach required us to exclude dual credit delivered through early college high schools from this component of the study. We do not view this as a major limitation, since a number of rigorous studies have documented the benefits of early college high schools for a wide range of students, including those who are traditionally underrepresented in post-secondary education. Second, descriptive evidence from phase 1 documented disparities in dual credit participation by race and ethnicity. To dig deeper, we used coordinating board and TEA data to assess the extent to which these disparities are driven by a number of factors, including differential access to dual credit programs and APIB courses, differential levels of academic preparation and income, differential access to fee waivers, and differences in the high schools that students attend. Third, in 2015, the Texas legislature passed House Bill 505, which significantly loosened restrictions on access and participation in dual credit education programs, particularly for 9th and 10th graders. In phase 1, RAND was unable to obtain sufficient data on student participation and outcomes since the passage of House Bill 505. So in phase 2, we examined whether patterns in dual credit participation, course grades, and the delivery of dual credit programs has changed since the passage of House Bill 505. Fourth, the advising study used interviews with 100 college advisors and high school guidance counselors to better understand advising practices in dual credit courses and to identify potentially promising approaches or ways that the advising process may be improved within dual credit partnerships. We designed the advising study to include a broad range of dual credit partnerships, including early college high schools, dual credit delivered by 2- and 4-year colleges in both urban and rural settings, and dual credit programs that deliver a significant number of CTE dual credit courses. However, the study provided richer information about advising for academic dual credit courses delivered by 2-year colleges, since such courses represent the vast majority of dual credit courses delivered in the state. Fifth, since research in phase 1 uncovered systematic differences in instructor characteristics across dual credit and college credit only courses, the academic rigor study assessed whether there are systematic differences in curricula, including course content and standards, assessment methods, and teaching approaches between dual credit and college credit only courses. We collected course materials, assignments, graded student work products, and an instructor survey from instructors of 2 common dual credit courses, English 1301 and Math 1314. And we worked with a team of research assistants to assess differences in dual credit versus college credit only versions of those courses. It's important to note that this component of the study focused only on dual credit and college credit only courses delivered by community colleges and does not distinguish between courses delivered through early college high school versus regular dual credit partnerships. Finally, the cost study used an ingredients approach that drew on coordinating board and TEA data, as well as interviews with administrators at community colleges and K-12 school districts to assess the cost of delivering a dual credit course as opposed to a high school credit only course, how those costs are borne by different stakeholders, and how costs compare both to the revenues generated as well as the benefits of dual credit education. This component of the study focused only on academic dual credit courses delivered by community colleges, so we cannot speak to costs of CTE dual credit education. However, we included a sufficient number of early college high schools in our samples in our sample to estimate the cost of dual credit delivered through regular dual credit partnerships versus early college high schools. We also purposefully included dual credit partnerships that deliver dual credit courses to rural high schools in our sample, but we're unable to provide separate cost estimates for dual credit delivered in urban versus rural settings. So with respect to the impact of dual credit education, we found that dual credit participants had much higher rates of college enrollment and completion than did non-participants. However, much of the differences in these outcomes were due to differences in student characteristics, such as academic preparation and motivation, between the dual credit participants and non-participants. After controlling for these differences in student characteristics using our instrumental variables model, we found that participating in dual credit education increased the rate that high school participants enrolled in college by 2.4 percentage points and completed a college credential by 1.1 percentage points. While relatively modest in compared to the descriptive patterns we've seen in past studies, these causal effects are significant and meaningful. They're just more in line with the kinds of impacts we see from other interventions designed to improve college access and success. So for college enrollment, this can be seen in the leftmost set of bars in the figure on the left. Dual credit participants in blue had a college enrollment rate of 79.4% compared to their non-participant counterparts in orange of 48.5%. Moving to the middle set of columns, where we control directly for observable differences between dual credit participants and non-participants, such as race, ethnicity, free lunch eligibility, and 8th grade standardized test scores, we see that dual credit participants had a college enrollment rate of 72% compared to a rate of 50.3% for non-participants. Finally, when we employ our instrumental variables model to control for both observable differences, such as race and ethnicity and test scores, and unobservable differences, such as motivation and desire to go to college, we see that dual credit participants had a college enrollment rate of 56.4% compared to a college enrollment rate of non-participants of 54%. This is where we get our estimate of the causal effect of dual credit participation. 56.4% minus 54.0% leads to 2.4% increase in college enrollment attributable to participation in dual credit. The figure on the right here shows a similar pattern for college completion. Here we produce similar figures for time to degree on the left and semester credit hour to degree on the right. The results show that dual credit participation reduced time to degree by 0.1 years, or about 1 summer term. Dual credit participation also increased the number of semester credit hours a student takes to complete the bachelor's degree by 4.3 semester credit hours. Note that this is total semester credit hours and includes semester credit hours earned as dual credit. The number of semester credit hours earned to degree after completing high school declined as a result of taking dual credit. One concerning finding was that while the effect of participating in dual credit programs was positive on average, it was more positive for traditionally advantaged student groups like white students and students with higher standardized test scores. The effect was less positive and negative in some cases for underrepresented minorities and students who were eligible for free or reduced price lunch. Further analyses suggest that the negative results for free and reduced price lunch eligible students were likely due to the fact that they were more likely than those who were ineligible to have lower 8th grade standardized test scores that hindered their success in dual credit education courses. In particular, we find that the impact of dual credit education for free and reduced price lunch eligible students with 8th grade standardized test scores that were above average, the impact was positive for all outcomes. It's also important to reiterate again that our causal impact analysis does not include dual credit courses delivered by early college high schools. Thus, the negative findings for free and reduced price lunch eligible students with lower 8th grade standardized test scores speak only to the impact of regular dual credit education programs. Rigorous experimental studies that have included some Texas early college high schools have documented the positive impact of early college high schools on a range of student outcomes for traditionally underrepresented students. With respect to racial disparities, we found that most of the gap in dual credit participation by race and ethnicity can be explained by differences in academic preparation, income, and the high school that students attend. This can be seen in the figure here. The bars on the left side of the figure show the dual credit participation rate by race and ethnicity. Those on the right use our econometric model to project what the dual credit participation rate would be for each racial and ethnic group if they had the same academic preparation and income and attended the same high schools as a typical white student. For example, as seen in the dark red column on the left side of the figure, the black dual credit participation rate was 10.6%, while that of white students in the gray column was 24.7%. As seen in the corresponding columns on the right side of the figure, our analysis indicated that if blacks had the same academic preparation and income and attended the same high schools as a typical white student, then their participation rate would have been 22.7%, which is quite close to the rate for white students. We found similar patterns for Hispanic students. It's also noteworthy that the three other factors we examined, differences in access to dual credit, AP and IB courses, and tuition and fee waivers, explain very little of the gap in dual credit participation by race and ethnicity. It's also important to reiterate that as a whole, the factors we examined explain most, but not all, of the gap in dual credit participation by race and ethnicity. So some of the difference was left unexplained by these factors. We also found that dual credit participation increased modestly overall after the passage of House Bill 505, but increased significantly in percentage terms for 9th and 10th graders, more than doubling for 9th graders and increasing by 60% for 10th graders. At the same time, the academic preparation of 9th graders, as measured by 8th grade standardized test scores, declined after House Bill 505, while the share of dual credit students receiving A's in those courses increased. This suggests that the rigor of dual credit courses for 9th and 10th graders could have declined since the passage of House Bill 505. However, this finding could also just be systematic of an overall trend of grade inflation in college courses. With respect to advising, we found that high school guidance counselors play the leading role in advising dual credit students, with college advisors largely playing a support role in providing information or training. And in general, the students who are targeted for dual credit depends on the partnership's philosophy around who is likely to benefit from dual credit. Some partnerships encouraged as many eligible students as possible to take dual credit courses, while others tried to limit access to students whom they thought were academically and emotionally prepared. When describing factors that they considered when advising students on which dual credit courses to take, high school counselors cited issues around the student's grade level and credit transfer policies. The latter was particularly salient for students who wanted to enroll at a private institution or out of state. College advisors and high school guidance counselors also identified a number of ways they thought advising could be improved. These included increasing the involvement of colleges in the advising process, providing advising to younger students, even those in middle school, and providing greater clarity on credit transfer policies. With respect to the academic rigor of college algebra and English composition courses, we found more similarities than differences between the three course modes we examined: dual credit courses taught by high school teachers, dual credit courses taught by college instructors, and college credit only courses at community colleges. We observed no differences in content covered, assessment methods and standards, and the cognitive complexity demanded of these courses across modality. However, we did see small differences in the skills taught and instructional strategies used in the course. Our cost study estimated that the cost of providing an academic dual credit course as opposed to a high school credit only course was $111 per semester credit hour. This is significantly more than the $38 per semester credit hour and additional revenue that community colleges take in from the state when delivering a dual credit course. Tuition and fee waivers are common, and they shift the cost burden of dual credit from students towards community colleges. We also estimated significant differences in costs by instructional model, with adjunct college faculty being the least costly. Finally, we estimated that the long-term benefits of dual credit education are $552 per semester credit hour on average, and this far outweighs the costs of $111 per semester credit hour. So over the next few months, we'll be engaging extensively with stakeholders across the state to help contextualize our findings and develop policy recommendations. We released a draft report on the coordinating board at the coordinating board meeting on July 26th, and it can be accessed at the website on this slide. We're accepting public comment from interested stakeholders through August 27th. Instructions for providing public comment are on the website. It's important to note that the current version of our draft report does not have any policy recommendations in it. We are looking to interested stakeholders to help us contextualize our findings and provide input on policy implications and recommendations that are grounded in the finding and mindful of their impact on stakeholders. The public comment period is your opportunity to provide this crucial input, so please send your thoughts and reflections on the findings and potential policy recommendations. Sometime in late September, we'll hold a webinar to summarize the public comment we received and to share draft policy recommendations with interested stakeholders. We will gather stakeholder input on the policy recommendations in early October and submit the final report of policy recommendations at the October 25th board meeting of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. So thank you for your time today, and let's move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar.
All right, well, thank you, Trey. And I am just pulling up all the questions that have been posted so far. Let's see. I don't know how to expand this. Do you know?
Let's see.
Just give us a few seconds while we figure this out. All right. So one of the questions that we received, and this question is for Trey, is, let's go to the top. How confident is your team that the IB or instrumental variable approach you chose? So let's start with that question. There seems to be a series of questions, so
I'm having trouble pulling them up.
Yeah, let's just focus on that one and then.
Okay, so there's a question on the methodology, the instrumental variable model that we chose to use. So we basically the idea behind the instrumental, our methodology was to get students who take dual credit courses, even conditional on their test scores and observable characteristics, taking a dual credit course is a signal that a student wants to go to college, right? So we're concerned about reverse causality, that the students who take dual credit courses are doing so because they want to go to college, so that the differences in outcomes by whether or not a student enrolled or took a dual credit course was due, more to their underlying motivation to go to college than it was about taking the dual credit course, or could be. And this has been a limitation of most, kind of past studies, particularly of general dual credit education. So what we did was we designed this causal impact study that used, differences over time in the implementation of dual credit education programs across high schools within the state. And so there's a particular question about that instrument. The general idea behind the instrument was that, to think about, basically the idea is to think about a student who was in a high school with a lot of dual credit and versus the same student who was in a high school with less dual credit. And we're basically only using the variance in whether a student participates in dual credit that's driven by and due to this, having more access to dual credit in your high school. I will answer this question in more detail in the document that we'll share later. But we have done some additional probing of the IV, and we're comfortable with it. So
yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Trey. This is an easy question to answer. Will this presentation be made available online? The answer is yes. The coordinating board will be posting the recording on the dual credit website, and I will work with others at the coordinating board to send a email through delivery to all community colleges as well as K through 12 districts to let you know exactly where you can access that recording. Okay. Let's see. We received a question, is regional data available?
So does that mean differences in outcomes or by region? What's that?
Well, the AR study looks at dual credit statewide. There was no analysis that focused on dual credit by region per se. Do you agree with that, Trey?
I think so. At this point, we have not done analysis. We did in phase 1 have some results that we broke out, participation by region, but we have not focused on that in this particular report.
Yeah. All right. So the next question we have is this one. Okay. Oh.
So basically, all of the questions are around the methodology, which we will answer in the document later. So I'm interested if there are other questions that anyone on the line has.
Yeah.
So there's a question about whether there's any data collected on the potential impact of number of semester credit hours taken as dual credit on financial aid once a student graduates. We did some exploratory analyses using financial aid and student loan data that the state has. We weren't that confident in the results we were getting. We were trying to. We thought they might have more potential to confuse. So we have not looked at that explicitly, and we didn't include that analysis in the report. But I know that David Trotman's UT system study has looked at financial aid, I believe. So that's a source to look at.
So we have 20 minutes left in the webinar. So please answer or ask your questions.
Okay, so there's a question about early college high schools, about whether we included early college high schools in the analysis and the outcome analysis. And, our methodology that use percent, the percent of students in your cohort taking a dual credit course, it really doesn't lend itself to studying early college high school, since all students in the early college high school are basically participating in dual credit. So the methodology we chose was not really appropriate for looking at early college high schools. So we excluded them from that analysis. Now, that doesn't mean we don't think that looking at early college high schools is important. We just also recognize that there's a lot of research out there from randomized studies that has shown that early college high schools, have positive impacts on students. So we've really been trying to, leverage that information and point to that existing research around early college high schools and make sure that people understand that. So that's really, we thought it was just much more valuable to do this causal impact study on the impact of regular dual credit programs in Texas than it was to do a descriptive analysis just controlling for test scores that also included the early college high schools in it. We did something similar to that in phase 1, and we really wanted to go a step further and say, what is the real impact of taking a dual credit course? And so I hope that answers that question. Do we have any plans for including early college high school with a different methodology in the future? I think we really are pointing to that, the randomized controlled trial experimental evidence around early college high schools as, our evidence. They have shown, those randomized controlled trials have really shown that well-implemented early college high schools have a positive impact on a broad range of students, and we don't, really question that research. So we could, consider that in the future, but at this point, our study really focuses on that additional, research question around. Sorry, do you have another question, Holly?
Yeah. So we have a question that is there any consistency across the state in the way that community colleges are discounting tuition for dual credit courses? So Drew and David, can you answer this question from your understanding?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. This is Drew Etchison from AIR. In the cost study, we looked at different methods or models of discounting tuition, and it was pretty varied across the state. For the cost study, we looked extensively at 5 community college districts, and we found that of those 5, 2 ended up pretty much completely waiving tuition and fees, and those were fairly large urban districts, and then the rest gave some sort of discounted tuition and fee structure. I think that's probably the most common method, and that's confirmed by the Texas Association of Community College data, which found that a large number of the community colleges give some sort of reduced tuition, and then once the college charges tuition or fees for dual credit students, then it's really up to the K-12 districts as to whether the K-12 districts are going to take on the burden of paying for those fees or whether they're going to pass those on to the students. And again, across the K-12 districts that we used for this study, there was a variety of methods in which the K-12 districts ended up paying for those tuition and fees. Some of them paid for them entirely, along with textbooks. Some of them passed on the cost to the students entirely. Some of the districts decided that they would pay for the tuition and fees for students who are on free and reduced lunch. So there really is a variety of ways across the state in which tuition and fees are dealt with.
Well, thanks, Drew.
What about excess?
The next question we have is, have you looked at the possible excess credit hours earned by dual credit students? Are you considering the role of the Pathways Project as it impacts dual credit and early college high school students?
So we did look at semester credit hour to degree for students who completed 4-year degrees, and we saw, I believe, we presented the results that participating in dual credit increased the total semester credit hours to degree, including the dual credit semester credit hours, by about 4.3 semester credit hours. But it's important to note that it actually reduces the number of semester credit hours students take once they enroll in college, and reduces time to degree. So there is an increase in semester credit hour to degree, but a decrease in time and time to degree. It's also, I guess, worth noting that, you know, both dual credit participants and non-participants complete their degrees with significantly more than the 120 to 126 semester credit hours that are required of, you know, most 4-year degree plans. So there's more work to be done there, you know, kind of regardless.
Yeah. Our next question is regarding advising. So was there any data collected on whether students had access to a college prep course, for example, AVID strategies, college advising, prior to enrolling or concurrently enrolled with their dual credit courses? If so, what were their findings? Courtney, could you answer that question?
Yeah, this is Courtney Tannenbaum from AIR. Thanks for the question. It's a good one. We didn't necessarily look at that. So the advising study was very descriptive. It was based on interviews with college counselors and high school advisors whose roles were to advise or counsel students into dual credit, as well as counsel students into specific dual credit courses. So what we asked about was less about the college prep or if they'd taken any of those. Sometimes that might have come into the responses that the advisors gave, but largely it was about the advisor and counselor's roles and the types of factors they considered in terms of how they might counsel students, one, to take or to pursue dual credit education, and then two, if they took dual credit education or enrolled in it, what courses that they would then guide students into. We did ask about whether they targeted students for, like, how they targeted students for dual credit and what the characteristics of those students were, and there was variance in that regard in terms of some partnerships really targeted students that were excelling, and they looked at those students who were, you know, in the top 10 to 25% in their classes and who were also eligible for AP and IB courses. But then other partnerships really took a different approach and encouraged all students, as long as they met the eligibility criteria, to enroll, and including, and they did provide some of these schools did provide support to help students prep for dual credit. So they had that goal of kind of increasing access and enrollment. So I don't know if that, I hope that answers the question, but we didn't look very systematically at any sort of like the AVID or college prep courses in terms of, and then linking it to, we didn't link any of the advising to the outcomes that Trey presented.
Thank you, Courtney. Our next question is, what contextualization of these data through our stakeholder experiences would you find most helpful to assist you in your interpretation of these data?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, you know, what is really helpful for us is to understand, you know, why you think we might be finding what we're finding. Or if something doesn't make sense, some finding doesn't make sense to you given your experiences, that would be helpful as well. But, you know, do the findings resonate with your experience? Where does it, you know, really not resonate? And when they do resonate with your experiences, you know, could you provide us some context as to why that might be the case? We're also really, you know, looking to you all for, you know, input on policy recommendations as well. So if these findings are true and they're the reality, you know, and given your situation, you know, what would be warranted? What policy implications are there from your perspective, and how would it affect you? I think that's all useful information for us.
Mm-hmm. We're just sorting through the questions list, so bear with us. Okay, so the next question is, was there any indication of whether certain types of dual credit courses were particularly advantageous, especially for low-income students, for example, English, language arts versus math, etc.?
So we didn't look at the impact of particular dual credit courses. We explored looking at the impact of CTE dual credit versus academic dual credit. The issue is that the coordinating board only started collecting detailed course data in 2012, and since our methodology kind of leveraged growth over time across high schools and participation and implementation of dual credit, you know, just looking at 2012 forward and being able to capture outcomes on those students really didn't give us enough statistical power to implement our methodology very well. You know, I am comfortable saying, you know, when we ran the model with CTE courses for 2012 forward, we found that taking a CTE dual credit course, for example, significantly increased the likelihood that students enroll in a two-year institution with the intent of obtaining a certificate, which makes sense. So it suggests that students were taking you know, CTE, who were taking CTE dual credit courses were doing so, you know, in many cases in order to pursue that educational option down the road. But, you know, we would have liked to have looked more at impact of particular courses, but it was really challenging.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you, Trey. We're coming down to the wire, so if you have any questions, this is the time to ask them. One question we got is, are there focus areas of academic pathways connected towards a guide for dual credit students while in high school? I think this is a question about advising. So Courtney, would you be able to answer it?
So could you, sorry, Holly, I was typing down some notes. Could you repeat the question again? I just can't see it on my screen.
Are there focus areas of academic pathways connected towards a guide for dual credit students while in high school?
Yeah, so that it sounds like the question is around, you know, whether there's, you know, explicit thinking or putting together guides for students about what courses.
No, it's a great question. We did ask about that, and again, it really varied. We did collect data from early college high schools for the advising, and I would say, and of course, in the early college high schools, that was a definite theme. They have pretty strict pathways for students and course sequences for students to take. And then in the traditional high schools, it did vary. Some, especially if they only targeted juniors and seniors, for example, for dual credit, there were many that limited, like really mapped the courses that juniors and seniors could take to also their high school requirements. So there was a clear map there, and the choices for students were pretty slim. So they had, you know, one or two course choices that they could take, and it was linked directly to both earning their high school degree as well as making progress towards a college degree. So, and a lot of the mapping was done looking at sort of those core classes that are required to graduate with any type of degree. So the dual credit partnerships most of them focused on those core classes so that there was a mapping from high school into the post-secondary degree path. There were others that just offered a whole range of courses, especially when they offered them to freshmen and sophomores, and those included like learning frameworks classes, sort of those college prep classes that helped ease students into dual credit. So I would say it varied, but with the early college high schools and some high schools being very targeted and providing stricter maps into a college degree.
All right, thank you.
Yes, I'll just add, really quickly, I'll just add one challenge that did come up though, is that many dual credit students are, especially the younger ones, don't yet know what they're going to major in. So that did come up as a challenge that advisors said, it was a little bit problematic in trying to really carefully map out degree pathways for students.
Thank you, Courtney. I think we have time for just 2 more questions. And so the next question we have is, although not discussed during the webinar, can you address your statement in the report regarding the 9th and 10th grade dual credit coursework as not being in the core?
Yeah, so we looked at the courses, the dual credit courses students were taking by grade, and 11th and 12th graders were by and large, they were taking mostly, typical, college courses, the ones you think of, English, composition, college algebra, history, and economics, things like that in the core. 9th and 10th graders, the most common courses were things like, learning frameworks and, computer applications courses. Out of the top 10 most popular courses in terms of number of semester credit hours that were delivered, none of them were in the, kind of academic core. So unclear what to make of that, except that the students, the dual credit courses are not the ones in the core. They're more these college preparatory courses in some cases.
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't have any other questions that were submitted. So thank you everyone for participating in the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, AIR intends to summarize the questions and answers from this webinar, and the coordinating board will be posting that document as well as recording of the webinar. So please feel free to share those documents with your colleagues at institutions that are interested in dual credit. And if you have any questions, you can email this question specifically about the project to Trey Miller. His email address is on our dual credit study website. And as Trey mentioned, the public comment period is open till August the 27th. And information about how to submit a public comment is also on our dual credit study website. So thank you again. I don't know if Trey wants to say anything before we conclude the webinar.
No, just thank you all for your interest in participating in the webinar. We know that this is an important policy issue that affects a number of stakeholders across the state. Dual credit's important for students in Texas, and we appreciate you participating in the process. And please do, send us public comments, send us thoughts on what you think this research, how it speaks to potential policy implications. That's really how we're going to develop our recommendations. So it's your opportunity. So thank you, and we'll post that response document soon. All right, bye-bye.